I always believed that there would be a moment in my life when I would be able to say enough. I imagined it to be something special, heroic, like in a movie, with dramatic music in the background. But when that moment came, the loudest sound was the silence that followed my mother-in-law's spit. Sunday lunch. It was so ordinary that it was already sickening to the teeth from its regularity. I placed a roasted duck with oranges in the center of the table. Marjorie was always critical of my cooking, but this time I had outdone myself. The duck was perfect, with a crispy crust that was just the right shade of amber, and it was exuding the aroma of rosemary and garlic. More of your exotic stuff? Marjorie grimaced, looking at the dish as if I had placed a plate of live worms in front of her. In our family, we always served roast beef for Sunday dinner. But of course, you're not part of our family to know that. Noah, my husband and the woman's son, just sighed, but didn't say anything, as usual. I caught his gaze, looking for some kind of support, but he was staring at his plate. Mom, leave it alone, he finally muttered. Let's just eat. I'm just stating a fact. Marjorie straightened her napkin in her lap. Audrey has been in our family for 5 years, and in that time, she hasn't even bothered to learn the basic traditions. Marjorie, I tried to remain calm. I remembered about the roast beef. I just wanted to cook something special tonight. Special? She took a bite of duck, holding her fork with 2 fingers as if she was afraid of getting dirty, and not salted enough. I felt my jaw tense, but continued to smile. 5 years of such comments had taught me to wear a mask of calm, as if these words didn't stick into me with invisible needles, didn't leave tiny scars on my soul, invisible to others. Did you know that Noah doesn't like oranges? Marjorie continued, picking up a piece of garnish. Of course, if you were a real wife, you would know such basic things. Mom, I'm fine with oranges, Noah interjected, but hesitantly, as if to justify himself. Don't lie to hurt her feelings, dear. Marjorie patted her son's arm. You've hated citrus since you were 5 years old. Do you remember when you threw up at Cousin Richard's birthday party after eating an orange cake? I watched this exchange of remarks, feeling a strange sensation build up inside me, a mixture of anger, fatigue, and some unexpected clarity. Yesterday, Noah ate a whole orange for breakfast, I said in a steady voice, and he asked for another. Marjorie turned to me, her eyes narrowed. Are you calling me a liar? I'm just stating a fact. I repeated her words, feeling strangely satisfied. Audrey? Noah reached for my shoulder, but I moved away slightly. What, Audrey? I looked him straight in the eye. He hesitated, and that was enough. I could see in his eyes the same uncertainty with which he had looked at me in the morning when I asked him if it was time for his mother to look for her own place. The same uncertainty with which he had promised to talk to her about the fact that she had repainted the walls in the living room while I was away. The same cowardly, pathetic uncertainty that had become the foundation of our marriage. Maybe I don't remember, he finally mumbled. You have a bad memory, son. Marjorie stroked his hand again. You've always been scatterbrained. Remember the time you forgot your biology project in 8th grade and I had to race to school in the middle of the day to get it? Something tells me Noah isn't that scatterbrained, I said, putting down my fork. He remembers what's in his best interest to remember. You're out of line, Audrey. Marjorie's voice was icy. You're a guest in this family. A temporary guest, as I always told Noah. I slowly looked up, meeting the eyes of this woman who had made the last 5 years of my life a constant struggle to breathe in my own home. A guest? My hand involuntarily clenched the napkin. In my own home? This is the Gaines family home. Marjorie cut me off. Just because my son married you out of pity doesn't make you part of this family. Marjorie? Noah raised his voice, but his indignation sounded too late and unconvincing. Not the usual forced calm, but something new, cold and resolute. Although, of course, after 5 years of living together, you might know that, if you'd ever listen to what I have to say. Nonsense, Marjorie snorted. Noah told me it was a joint purchase. I turned my gaze to my husband. He sat pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Audrey, let's not do this now, he began. When, Noah? I asked quietly. When is the moment when you stop lying to your mother? When will you stop lying to me? When will you stop lying to yourself? Don't you dare talk to my son like that. Marjorie pushed her plate away. He let you live in this house. He provides for you. You really think so? I didn't even raise my voice. That he provides for me and not the other way around? Silence fell. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, an old one, my grandmother's, one of the few items Marjorie hadn't tried to replace over the years. You're just ungrateful, Marjorie said. I always knew you weren't worthy of our family. I always knew you married Noah for money, and that you made up the whole inheritance thing to get your hands on the house. Something must have changed in my view, because Noah suddenly fidgeted anxiously. Audrey, Mom, let's just... You'll never be a part of our family, Marjorie interrupted, standing up from the table. You're just... She didn't finish. Instead, I felt something wet on my face. For a moment, I didn't even realize what had happened. And then I realized that my mother-in-law had just spit in my face. Time seemed to stop. I saw Noah's face freeze in a grimace of shock. I saw Marjorie slowly sinking back into her chair, her eyes blazing with triumph. I could see the sunlight falling through the window onto the oak table, my grandmother's table, the one she taught me to bake cookies at when I was 7 years old. I slowly took a napkin and wiped my face. Then I put it next to the plate, neatly in a businesslike manner. Okay, I said, so calmly that I surprised myself. Since I'm never going to be a part of your family, I don't think we should live under the same roof anymore. Audrey, Noah started again, but I held up my hand to stop him. I've already drawn up the papers to move you both out of this house. Marjorie's face froze and then turned red. What the hell? You can't... Yes, I can. I pointed to a small folder on the side table. The house is legally mine, and the lawyer confirmed that I have every right to decide who lives in it. You're bluffing, Marjorie hissed. I slowly got up and picked up the folder. It was heavy, not so much physically as emotionally. It contained more than just papers. It was the end of one story and the beginning of another. You have 30 days to find another place to live. I put the documents on the table in front of Noah. If you don't leave voluntarily, we will be forced to evict you. You can't do this to my son. Marjorie jumped up, but I didn't back down. The son you've been using as a shield his whole life? I looked at Noah, who sat staring at the documents. I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. I turned and walked to the exit of the dining room. Behind me, I heard Marjorie's angry scream. Noah, say something to this. But he was silent, as always. I went up to the bedroom and closed the door. I sat on the bed, listening to the argument downstairs, Marjorie's voice booming like thunder, and Noah's quieter responses coming in snatches. I knew this scenario by heart. She would yell, he would make excuses, and then they would try to find a way out that would please her. But this time, it was different. This time, I held the keys to my future in my hands. 20 minutes later, I heard the front door slam. They had left, apparently, to her friend Beverly's house to discuss this terrible situation. I slowly went down the stairs. The house seemed strangely quiet and large. My perfect duck was still on the dining room table, already cold. Empty chairs. The documents that Noah hadn't brought with him. He probably hoped that if he ignored them, they would disappear, like most of the problems in his life. I sat down at the table and picked up the papers. Flipping through the pages, I remembered every step that had led me to this moment. Every little insult, every betrayal, every moment when I denied myself for the sake of false peace. How did it all come to this point? 5 years ago, I still believed in fairy tales. Not in those children's ones with princesses and dragons, but in adult ones, about love at first sight, about a family that welcomes you with open arms, about happy endings after happily ever after. I met Noah at the Prekrestvo bookstore on a cold October evening. He elbowed me while trying to get a book from the top shelf, and my coffee spilled onto the pages of the novel I was about to buy. Oh God, I'm so sorry. His face expressed sincere remorse. Please let me buy you a new copy and maybe another coffee? His eyes were kind, brown with golden sparkles that appeared when he smiled. And he smiled a lot. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was his hands, big, long fingers that he kept tucking into the sleeves of his sweater, as if he was ashamed of their size. My name is Noah, he said as we sat down with new cups of coffee in the corner of the bookstore. Noah Gaines. Audrey Mayfield, I replied, feeling something strange happening in my stomach, as if 100 butterflies had decided to have a party there. I was 27 and had spent most of my life watching others find love. I grew up with a mom who worked 2 jobs to provide for us. She rarely talked about my father, only that he left when she found out she was pregnant. Sometimes, when she thought I didn't see, she would look at old photos and cry. Perhaps that's why I dreamed so much of a real family, with a father who doesn't run away, with a home full of love and support, with people who don't disappear when things get hard. I thought I found it all in Noah. He was an architect's assistant, was fond of jazz and collected old watches. He told funny stories about his clients and always held my hand when we crossed the road, even if there were no cars around. Our romance developed rapidly, like a spring flood. 3 weeks later, he already had the keys to my apartment. 3 months later, we were talking about a future together. And on the 6th month, he proposed to me on the roof of his office building, arranging candles in the shape of a heart. Marry me, Audrey, he said, down on one knee, the candlelight reflecting in his eyes. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I said yes before he could open the box with the ring. The first warning signs came when we started planning the wedding. Noah called his mother to tell her the news and put the phone on speakerphone. Noah, honey, I'm so happy for you. Her voice was as sweet as molasses. You know I've always wanted to organize your wedding. I already have a list of the best venues and a wonderful caterer who did Beverly's reception last year. Mom, we haven't talked about the details yet. Noah gave me a guilty look. You're on speakerphone. Pause. Oh, hi, Audrey. Her tone changed, a little cooler. I hope you don't mind if I help with the organization. This is such an important event for our family. I remember looking at Noah, expecting him to say something like, we can handle it, or we'll definitely involve you, but I'll make the big decisions with Audrey. Of course, Marjorie, I replied, feeling my dream of an intimate wedding on the beach dissolve into thin air. We'd love your help. And that was just the beginning. Over the next few months, Marjorie Gaines gradually took control of every aspect of our wedding, from the color of the flowers to the guest list, and every time I tried to voice my opinion, she would respond with the same phrase, Honey, that's not how we do things in our family. Noah usually stood aside, avoiding conflicts. Sometimes he would come to me late at night, hug me, and whisper, It's just a wedding, Audrey. The main thing is that we will be together. And I agreed because I loved him, and because I wanted to have a family so badly that I was ready to give up anything. We got married at the Grange Hall Hotel, a huge Victorian mansion that Marjorie chose because her friend's son was getting married there. Instead of 120 guests, as Noah and I had planned, there were 250, most of whom I saw for the first time in my life. Instead of blue hydrangeas, which I loved, there were white lilies because, according to Marjorie, hydrangeas are flowers for gardeners, not for brides from good families. A week after the honeymoon, I received a phone call from my grandmother's old neighbor, Mrs. Pringle. "Audrey, dear," her voice trembled. "Your grandmother. She passed away last night. In her sleep, peacefully. I found her when I came in for morning tea. The world was shaken. My grandmother Eleanor was the only constant in my childhood. When my mother was working, I stayed with her in her old house on Clement Street, where it smelled like cinnamon and there was always classical music playing. She taught me how to bake cookies, told me stories about her youth, and never, ever made me feel like a burden. At the funeral, Noah was there, holding my hand as I cried. Marjorie came too, in a perfectly tailored black suit, with an expression that should have shown sadness but looked more like eagerness. "Your grandmother was a very peculiar woman," she said as we walked back from the cemetery. "But that house of hers, admit it, you were relieved to move out of there? It's so old-fashioned." I didn't say anything. I didn't have the strength. 3 weeks after the funeral, we were summoned to the notary. I was sure that my grandmother had left me some small sum of money, or perhaps her book collection. "Mrs. Eleanor Mayfield has bequeathed her entire estate, including the house at 216 Clement Street, to her granddaughter Audrey Gaines, née Mayfield," the notary read. I could not believe my ears. My grandmother's house, a beautiful old 2-story house with an attic, a veranda, and a small garden, now belonged to me. "What's the point of having such a big house for 2 people?" was the first thing Marjorie said when we told her the news. "You're still young. Why would you want to keep such a property?" "It's the perfect place for a family," Noah replied, putting his arm around me. "For our future family." This silenced Marjorie, but only temporarily. We moved into my grandmother's house a month later. I walked through the rooms, touching the familiar furniture, breathing in the smell of wood and old books, and for the first time since her death, I felt something like peace. Everything was here, my memories, her presence, our shared history. And then Noah told me the news. "Honey, I wanted to talk to you about Mom." He nervously twirled the wedding ring on his finger. "She sold her house. The buyers got a great price, but her new apartment won't be ready for another 6 months. I was thinking maybe she could live with us during that time." I froze, feeling a chill run down my spine. 6 months? I asked again. "Noah, we just got married. This is our honeymoon." "I know, I know." He sat down next to me, took my hands in his. "But she's my mom, Audrey, and she has no place to live. I can't just leave her alone." "What about a hotel or a short-term apartment?" "6 months? That would cost a fortune," he sighed. "Please, Audrey, it's only temporary, and this house is so big. We won't even notice she's here." Oh, how wrong I was to agree to this. How naive I was to believe that Marjorie Gaines could be overlooked. She moved in a week later with 5 huge suitcases and a collection of porcelain figurines, which she immediately arranged on the living room mantel, removing my grandmother's photographs. "This house needs a little elegance," she said when I tried to object. Eleanor was a lovely woman, but her tastes, let's just say they belonged to another era. Noah stood next to me, looking from me to his mother, and remained silent. He was always silent when it came to making a choice between us. Over time, I began to notice certain patterns. If I cooked dinner, Marjorie would always find a reason not to eat. "I'm on a diet." "I have a sensitive stomach." "I already ate with my friend." But when Noah cooked, she praised every dish, even if it was just an omelet. If we planned to spend the evening together, something was bound to happen. Marjorie had a headache, or she needed help rearranging the furniture, or she ordered tickets to a play, just for the three of us, a surprise. I tried to talk to Noah about it, but he always had an excuse. She's just lonely after Dad died. She's trying to be helpful. It's her way of showing love. But the worst part was how Noah changed in her presence. My confident husband, who could convince a client to accept the most daring architectural project, turned into an insecure boy when his mother raised her voice. "You can't go to a conference for 3 days, Noah," she said one night at dinner. "Who's going to help me with the new curtains?" "But, Mom, it's important for my career. There will be leading architects there. More important than your mother?" Her lower lip trembled. And Noah gave up. He always did. 6 months turned into a year. Marjorie's new cooperative had problems with the paperwork. Then she decided it was too far away from us, and we're family. And then she just stopped talking about moving. One day, when Noah was away on a business trip and Marjorie and I were alone, she was sitting in my grandmother's chair, flipping through a glossy magazine. "You know, Audrey," she said, not looking up, "Noah was always a special child, sensitive, dependent. The other boys would run around with their friends, and he would sit at home with me, talking about his feelings, asking for advice. I always told him that no one would ever love him like his mother." She looked up and looked me straight in the eye. "No one. Never." In that moment, I realized that I was not just fighting an overbearing mother-in-law. I was fighting a woman who raised her son to be an emotional man. She had convinced him that love is control, that devotion is submission, that family is not a partnership of equals, but a hierarchy where she will always be on top. But I also realized that I loved Noah, and that somewhere under this dependence on my mother was the man I fell in love with in that bookstore. A man with kind eyes and a shy smile. A man who, perhaps, just didn't know that it was possible to live differently. So I was silent. I gave in. I swallowed the insults and pretended not to notice the manipulations. For the sake of Noah, for the sake of the family I had always dreamed of, for the sake of the foundation that, as I did not realize at the time, was built on sand. At the beginning of the 3rd year of our life together, I realized that I was living on a battlefield. The battle was quiet, with no visible wounds or loud explosions, but no less destructive. Every day turned into a series of small confrontations, where I was invariably on the losing end. It all started with little things. Marjorie started rearranging the furniture when I wasn't home. "This table just couldn't be left like this," she would explain when I noticed the changes. It was blocking the natural flow of energy in the house. Noah completely agreed with me. My husband shrugged his shoulders guiltily and never objected. Then the shelves of my books in the study suddenly became too cluttered and were cleared out. Most of my favorite novels were in boxes in the basement, and their place was taken by decorative vases and photos of Noah as a child. "This is a shared space, Audrey," Marjorie said. "You have to take into account the taste of all family members." One Tuesday, I came home from work to find the living room painted a pale beige instead of the warm green I loved so much. "What happened here?" I looked around the room where the painters were still putting away their supplies. "Oh, it's just a little upgrade." Marjorie smiled as if she was doing me a favor. "That green was so dull. This beige makes the space feel airy and light. Noah likes it, doesn't he, son?" Noah, who had just walked into the room, paused in the doorway, looking from me to his mother. Yeah, it looks brighter," he finally mumbled. "But you didn't even ask me." I tried to sound calm, even though my insides were seething. "This is my house, Marjorie." It's mine. I didn't want to change the color of the walls. Our house, Noah corrected me gently, coming closer. It's not the end of the world, right? I looked at him, then at Marjorie, who was standing there with a look of triumph on her face. It wasn't just a wall color. It was another boundary she had crossed to show me her dominance. And Noah was on her side again. Marjorie did not limit herself to the physical space. She actively interfered in our married life. One evening, as Noah and I were watching a movie, cuddled up on the couch, she sat down between us. It's such a lonely night. Another time, when we were about to celebrate our wedding anniversary, she suddenly called in sick. "I'm so sick, darling," she groaned, lying on the couch with her hand on her forehead. "I think it's a migraine, or something worse. You won't leave me alone tonight, will you?" And our romantic restaurant reservation was canceled. Instead, Noah stayed with his mother all evening while I made her tea and broth. Miraculously, she recovered the next morning as soon as she saw me leaving for work. But the worst part was her constant psychological pressure. Everyday comments that Marjorie seemed to drop unintentionally, but which cut into my self-esteem like little poisonous needles. "Oh, you're wearing that dress again? It's bold of you, with your figure." Noah had always loved home-cooked dinners. His ex, Vanessa, was such a great cook. "It's interesting that you chose such a simple career. Although, perhaps not everyone is given to be ambitious. I worked as a financial analyst in a small company. It was a job I loved and was proud of. But in Marjorie's eyes, it was something insignificant, unworthy of attention." One night at dinner, she accidentally spilled wine on my laptop, where the quarterly report was almost complete. "Oh, I'm clumsy." She blotted the keyboard with a napkin, further damaging the equipment. But after all, it's just some numbers, right? Not something really important. As I watched my hours of work disappear before my eyes, I felt something inside me slowly break. The tension at home began to affect my health. I was losing weight, sleeping poorly, and feeling anxious all the time. One morning, I woke up with a fever and a sore throat so bad I couldn't speak. "You need to rest," Noah said after taking my temperature. "I'm going to call your work and tell them you're sick." I spent the next 3 days in bed with a high fever and chills. The doctor diagnosed an acute sore throat and prescribed antibiotics. Noah promised to take care of me, but he spent most of his time downstairs with Marjorie, who, in her words, didn't want to get sick. On the evening of the third day of my illness, I heard them talking outside the bedroom door. "You can't stay with her all the time, Noah." Marjorie's voice was insistent. "You have a project to finish. And besides, you know Audrey, she's just being dramatic to get your attention." "Mom, she's got a fever of 39. I've had higher fevers, and I haven't been down for weeks. She's just weak. She always has been." She pauses, then Noah's voice, quieter. "Maybe you're right. I really should finish the sketches by morning." "Of course I'm right, darling. I always want the best for you. Now come downstairs. I've made your favorite apple pie." Their footsteps faded away, and I lay alone, tears streaming down my temples. He didn't even come in to see if I needed anything. That night I felt worse. The temperature rose to 40. I was shaking with chills. Then I was in a fever. I tried to call Noah, but my voice wouldn't listen, and my phone was dead. Unable to get up, I knocked a table lamp off the nightstand, hoping the noise would attract attention. A few minutes later, the door opened, but it wasn't Marjorie. "Oh my God, Audrey!" She turned on the light and walked over to the bed. "Where's Noah?" I tried to answer, but could only shake my head. "I'm calling an ambulance." She was already dialing. The next few hours were a blur. I remember being carried through the hospital corridors, the doctor saying something about severe dehydration and complications of a sore throat. I remember the drops of antibiotics slowly flowing down the tube. Noah appeared only in the morning. confused and with a sense of guilt on his face. Audrey, I didn't know. I thought you were better. I was working on a project and fell asleep in my office. I didn't have the energy to argue. I just looked at him and thought, where were you when I needed you the most? After 3 days in the hospital, I was discharged. Noah was attentive for the first few days, bringing me tea and helping me with my medications. Marjorie kept to herself, but I could feel her dissatisfaction. Her son was paying attention to me, not her. During my recovery, I spent a lot of time in bed, reviewing our joint accounts and finances. My work helped distract me, and that's when I noticed the discrepancies. Large sums of money were disappearing from our joint account without explanation. Purchases I knew nothing about. Cash withdrawals on days when I was definitely at work and Noah was on a business trip. One day, when no one was home, I went into Noah's office and looked through his documents. What I found gave me a chill. A credit card in Marjorie's name linked to our joint account. Bills for jewelry I'd never seen. Documents for a new car for Marjorie, paid for out of my personal savings. They were using my money I had earned, money I had saved for years. And Noah allowed it. In fact, he was complicit. That evening, when they returned, I asked him about it, trying to stay calm. Noah, can you explain these expenses? I showed him the printouts. He turned pale, but quickly composed himself. Well, you were sick, and Mom was having some financial difficulties. I thought you might like to help. You used my personal savings to buy your mother a car without my knowledge or consent. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it was shaking with anger. Don't be so dramatic, Audrey. He waved me off. Did you really need that money? We're living in your house, eating your food. I thought you'd be happy to repay me. Repay you? I couldn't believe my ears. For what? For making my life a living hell for the two of you? For letting your mother control every aspect of our lives? For taking her side in every argument? Audrey, you're a hysterical child. He raised his voice. You always don't like something. Mom is right. You just don't know how to be part of a family. I backed away as if from a slap. At that moment, Marjorie appeared on the doorstep. What's going on here? She asked, but her eyes sparkled with pleasure at the fact that we were arguing. Nothing, Mom. Noah crumpled the printouts and threw them in the trash. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay next to the man who betrayed my trust and felt something inside me finally break. In the morning, I called my friend Rachel. I need to talk, I said, barely holding back my tears. We met in a small coffee shop on the other side of town, where there was no chance of running into Noah or Marjorie. I told Rachel everything, from the repainted walls to the financial fraud. She listened without interrupting, her face growing more and more serious. Audrey, she finally said, what you're describing is not just family problems. It's emotional abuse and financial fraud. I know, I whispered, twirling the cup in my hands, but I don't know what to do. I love Noah, but he's not the same man I married. No, Rachel shook her head. He's the same man. It's just that now you're seeing the real him, the man who allows his mother to control his life and abuse his wife, the man who steals your money. Her words were painful, but true. I felt something inside of me tearing away, the last illusions I had about my marriage, about the family I dreamed of. What should I do? I asked, feeling empty and helpless. First, protect yourself. Rachel leaned closer, financially and legally. The house belongs to you, right? Are you sure they can't take it? I hesitated. It was left to me by my grandmother. But I don't know the details. Then you need to find out, Rachel was determined. Check your rights. Open a new bank account that they don't know about and transfer your money there. And then what? My voice was almost inaudible. And then decide if you want to live like this. She took my hand. Audrey, you deserve better. You deserve respect. You deserve love that doesn't destroy you. The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer, a real estate specialist. I explained the situation, provided a copy of my grandmother's will and all the documents I could find. The situation is quite clear, Mrs. Gaines, the lawyer said, looking through the papers. The house belongs exclusively to you. It is not marital property because it was inherited. Your husband and his mother have no legal rights to it. And if, I hesitated, if I want them to leave? The lawyer looked at me over the top of his glasses. As the owner, you have every right to decide who lives in your house. If they refuse to leave voluntarily, you can initiate the eviction process. It will take time, but the law is on your side. I nodded, feeling my resolve grow. That same day, I opened a new bank account and transferred the rest of my savings there. I changed the passwords to all my financial accounts. I made copies of all important documents and left them in the safe at work. In the evening, I sat in my grandmother's old armchair, looking at the rain outside the window. I was thinking about the girl I used to be, a girl who dreamed of a perfect family, a home full of love. I thought about the woman I had become, cornered, betrayed, but still alive, and I decided that I would no longer be a victim in my own home. I would no longer be a shadow that slides silently through the corridors, begging for a little attention and respect. I will get back what is rightfully mine, my home, my dignity, my life. It was my invisible war, and I was finally ready to win it. 3 days passed after the incident when I last saw Noah and Marjorie. 3 days of blessed silence, when I could sleep without chest tightness, wake up and breathe air that was not poisoned by tension and manipulation. 3 days when this house belonged to me again, not only legally, but emotionally. And then they came back. I heard the doorbell ring as I was sorting old photos in the living room. For some reason, I immediately realized who it was. I went to the front door and froze for a moment, wondering whether to open it. But sooner or later, this conversation had to happen. Noah was standing on the doorstep, carrying a bouquet of white lilies, the flowers I hated but Marjorie loved. Audrey, he began, trying to smile. His eyes darted, not meeting mine. I thought we should talk. I stepped back silently, letting him into the house. He looked around as if he was seeing this space for the first time. You took away my mother's photos, he said, noticing the empty frames on the mantelpiece. They are my photos, I replied calmly. He ran a nervous hand through his hair. Look, what happened? It was a misunderstanding. Mom didn't mean to. She's just emotional. And where is she now? I interrupted him. At Beverly's, he shrugged. Look, Audrey, you can't seriously be thinking about moving out. This is our home together. No, Noah, I shook my head. This is my home, and you know it. You always knew it, but you kept it from your mother. You convinced her it was your home together. Why? He looked away. I just wanted to avoid conflict. My mother, she wouldn't understand that I was living in a house that belonged to you. So you lied to her. You lied to me, and you stole my money. I didn't. He suddenly became indignant. I just borrowed it. And for the family, if you really loved me, you wouldn't have counted every penny. I looked at this man and did not recognize him. Where was the Noah who tried to apologize for the spilled coffee? The one who looked at me with such tenderness that it took my breath away. Tell me the truth, I asked quietly, for once in your life. Why did you and your mother do all this? Why did you move in with me if she hates me so much? Noah remained silent, clutching the bouquet so tightly that the stems cracked. Because of the house? I continued. Because of the money? You don't understand, he finally answered, his voice tinged with anger. Mom always said that this house should have belonged to our family, a real family, not. He stopped talking, but it was too late. Not like me, I finished for him. a girl without a father, from a simple family, not good enough for the Gaineses. That's not what I meant. He took a step toward me, but I stepped back. And guess what, Noah? I don't care what you meant to say anymore. The eviction papers are real. You have 30 days. His face changed. The mask of remorse fell away, revealing something cold and calculating. You can't do this, he said quietly. We're married. This is my house, too. No, you can't. I went to the table and picked up the folder. The house belongs to me by right of inheritance. It is not jointly owned property. I paid all the maintenance bills, and the only contribution you made was to pay for a few repairs that I didn't ask for. I'm not leaving. He suddenly became determined. If you insist, I'll file for divorce and demand half of everything. Please do. I felt strangely calm, but it won't change the fact that the house will remain mine, and that you will both leave it, voluntarily or by force. We stood there looking at each other, two strangers who had once promised to love each other for the rest of their lives. Then Noah threw the bouquet on the floor. You're going to regret this, he said, heading for the door. You never deserved to be part of our family. When the door closed behind him, I slowly walked over to the bouquet, picked it up, and threw it in the trash. Then I sat down on the floor and cried, not out of grief or despair, but out of relief. The following days turned into a surreal battle. Noah and Marjorie returned, but now the atmosphere in the house was openly hostile. They ignored me, talking only to each other, as if I didn't exist. But I noticed things in the house starting to disappear, little things that Marjorie apparently thought were hers, even though most of them were my grandmother's inheritance. I contacted a lawyer to speed up the eviction process, and he advised me to record everything that was happening in the house. Take pictures of things going missing, record conversations if possible, he said, and change the locks as soon as they leave the house together. I did just that. When they went to Beverly's for dinner one night, I called a locksmith who quickly changed all the locks, and then I went through their rooms, taking pictures of the signs of destruction: torn wallpaper, stains on the carpet, scratched parquet. All this was evidence of their revenge. When they returned and found that they could not enter, a real scandal broke out. Marjorie was screaming at the top of her lungs, threatening to call the police. Noah tried to break down the door. I called the police, I told them through the closed door. Your things are packed in bags. They are on the veranda. The rest will be stored here until you find somewhere to move them. The next few hours were terrifying. The police did come, and both sides gave their versions. I showed them the deed to the house, my grandmother's will, utility bills, all in my name. The officers explained to Noah and Marjorie that this was a civil case, but warned them of the consequences of vandalism and trespassing. They left, taking the bags, but threatening to return with lawyers. The next morning, I got a call from my neighbor, Mrs. Pringle. Audrey, honey, are you okay? She sounded concerned. What happened? I explained the situation briefly, without going into details. I always knew there was something wrong with that woman. Mrs. Pringle sighed. She never said hello to the neighbors. And that boy? You deserve better, dear. Your grandmother would be proud of you. Her words warmed me, but I knew that not all the neighbors would be so understanding. Some had already given me judgmental looks when I went out to get the mail. Apparently, Marjorie had managed to tell her side of the story. Indeed, a few days later, I started receiving strange calls. Unfamiliar voices asked if it was true that I had thrown my sick husband and his elderly mother out into the street. Someone wrote "witch" on my mailbox, and one of Marjorie's former friends, whom I met in a supermarket, openly called me a gold digger. I tried to ignore it, but sometimes doubts crept into my soul. Maybe I was really too cruel. Maybe I should have found a compromise, give them more time to find a new place to live. But then I remembered all those years of humiliation, the spit in my face, the stolen money, and my resolve returned. On the 15th day after the eviction, I had an unexpected visitor. I opened the door and saw a young man who looked like Noah, but with a more open, kinder face. "Hello, Audrey," he said a little awkwardly. "I'm Ethan, Noah's cousin. We met at your wedding." I remembered him, the only one of the Gaines family who smiled at me genuinely that day. "What can I do for you, Ethan?" I asked, not inviting him inside. "I just wanted you to know." He looked around as if he was afraid of being overheard. "What Aunt Marjorie and Noah are doing. It's wrong. They're saying terrible things about you, and I know they're not true." I stared at him silently, not knowing if I could trust him. "They've always done this," he continued, "to Uncle Robert's first wife, to my brother's girlfriend. Anyone who threatened their little clan became an enemy." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, still suspicious. "Because I've seen them destroy several lives," he answered, and I saw sincerity in his eyes. Noah said he had found a lawyer who would help him sue for the house, or at least a substantial amount of money. "On what grounds?" "He claims that he invested a lot of money in the renovation of the house, and that you promised to sign over some of the property to him." Ethan sighed. "That's not true, I know. But Aunt Marjorie has powerful friends, and they're willing to testify in his favor." I thanked him for the warning and invited him inside for tea. Over the next hour, Ethan told me many things about the Gaines family that I should have known 5 years ago, about how Marjorie controlled every aspect of her late husband's life, how she turned Noah against any girl he liked at school, how she spread rumors about people who crossed her path. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked when he finished. "They're your family." "That's why," he smiled weakly. "Family isn't supposed to behave like this, and I don't want to be a part of it." After Ethan's visit, I contacted my lawyer and told him about the possible lawsuit. He advised me to collect all the checks, bills, and bank statements from the last 5 years to prove who was financially supporting the house. "And one more thing," he added, "make an appointment with a good therapist. Your state of mind after everything you've been through can be an important argument if the case goes to court." I thought about it and realized that I needed a therapist not only for the court. Years of emotional abuse had left deep scars that would not heal on their own. At the first session, I just cried. At the second, I talked about how I lost myself in this marriage. At the third session, I talked about the fear of being alone that made me endure all this for so long. "What did you like to do before you got married?" the therapist asked me at the fourth session. I thought about it and suddenly remembered. Photography. I used to spend hours wandering around the city with my camera, finding beauty in the most unexpected places. I would take pictures of old buildings, reflections in puddles, playful shadows on the walls. "Why did you stop?" the therapist asked. "Marjorie said it was a childish hobby," I answered quietly, "that a real woman should spend time at home and with her family, not running around with a camera like a teenager. What do you think about it now?" I was silent for a long time, and then I felt something change inside me, as if I were waking up after a long sleep. That evening, I took my old camera out of the pantry, dusted it off, and spent several hours photographing my house, not as a place of horrible memories, but as a space of possibilities. The light that fell through the windows, the shadows dancing on the walls, the textures of the old wood, the patterns on the carpets. The next day, I decided to change the interior, not in the way Marjorie did, not to erase the past, but to create something new. I brought green back into the living room, but now it was a deeper, richer shade. I removed the heavy curtains that Marjorie had chosen and replaced them with light white curtains that danced with the slightest breeze. She arranged her favorite books on the shelves, not for beauty, but for herself. I hung my own photographs on the walls, pictures taken years ago when I still believed in myself. Every small change was an act of freedom. Every decision I made on my own, without fear of criticism, made me stronger. I changed not only the house, but also my relationships with people. When Rachel invited me to dinner, I accepted even though I would have refused before, afraid of Noah and Marjorie's reaction. When my neighbor, Mrs. Pringle, offered to have tea with me and remember my grandmother, I invited her to my house, not ashamed of my less than perfect home. I started answering the unpleasant calls calmly and firmly. Yes, I evicted my husband and mother-in-law from my house. After years of emotional abuse, I decided to protect myself. If you have a complaint, please contact my lawyer. And miraculously, the calls gradually stopped. One evening, when I was sitting on the veranda with my camera, taking pictures of the sunset, I noticed a neighborhood boy watching me with interest. "Are you a photographer?" he asked, coming closer. "Yes," I answered, and suddenly realized it was true. "Ah, cool!" He looked at me with admiration. "Can I take a picture of you?" I smiled and picked up the camera. I clicked the shutter, capturing a moment of pure, innocent joy on his face. And in that moment, I felt something inside me finally heal. Not completely. Such wounds do not heal in one day, but enough so that I could breathe again. Enough so that I could feel joy again. Enough for me to be myself again. 8 months, 240 days, 5,760 hours of freedom. I didn't count this time on purpose, but sometimes, when I woke up in my bed, now really my own, I felt the need to realize how much time had passed since I had my life back. The spring sun was pouring through the living room windows, where I was setting up the lighting for the morning photo shoot. The rays played with the crystals I had hung on the windows, scattering rainbows across the walls. It was so different from the heavy curtains Marjorie had hung to make the house look more solid. My photography studio was small, just a converted room on the first floor that used to be Marjorie's guest bedroom. It was symbolic that the place that had been the source of so much pain had now become a space of creativity and joy. The doorbell rang to announce the arrival of my first clients of the day, a young couple with a baby. They wanted to take family photos for their grandmother, who lived in another city. "Good morning," I greeted them with a sincere smile. While we were working, I watched them. The tenderness with which the husband touched his wife's shoulder, the love in her eyes when she looked at her child. Once upon a time, moments like this used to hurt me, reminding me of my own broken dreams. Now I just enjoyed the opportunity to capture this beauty, to preserve the moment of true happiness. After the clients left, I made myself a cup of tea and sat down to look through the photos. My business was small but stable. At first, it was mostly friends and neighbors who came, but gradually word spread, and now I had clients almost every day. The legal battle with Noah took longer than I expected. Just as Ethan had warned, he tried to sue for part of the value of the house, claiming that he had invested heavily in its repair and maintenance. But thanks to carefully kept documents, testimony from contractors who confirmed that I had paid all the bills, and the legal support of my lawyer, the case ended in my favor. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago, finally freeing me from the Gaines name. I became Audrey Mayfield again, and it felt right. A phone call interrupted my thoughts. "Audrey, it's Rachel." "Of course not," I smiled, feeling grateful for this friendship that was stronger than I thought. "5 o'clock at the Olive Garden, right? Don't be late, I have news." I was curious, but I didn't ask. Rachel loved surprises. There were a few hours left before the meeting, so I decided to walk downtown to buy a gift for Mrs. Pringle, whose birthday was approaching. The old lady had been one of my biggest advocates throughout the divorce, driving gossipers away with her bluntness and the ginger tea she always had ready for me in her cozy kitchen. The day was sunny and warm, perfect for a walk. I walked along the familiar streets, enjoying the sense of calm that now accompanied me. Therapy helped me realize that those years with Noah and Marjorie were not a total mistake. They were a lesson I had to learn to become stronger. I was looking in the window of a small antique shop, thinking that an old pearl brooch might appeal to Mrs. Pringle when I felt someone's eyes on me. Turning, I froze. A few steps away from me was Marjorie Gaines. She looked older than I remembered. Shadows under her eyes, new wrinkles around her lips, tense shoulders. Audrey. She nodded, as if we were just acquaintances who had met by chance. Marjorie, I said, just as neutrally. I was expecting the usual tension in my chest, the adrenaline rush that always accompanied our meetings. But nothing of the sort happened. This woman no longer had any power over me. You look, well, she said, and it sounded almost like an accusation. Thank you. I didn't mean to continue the conversation, but she didn't leave. I hear you opened a photography studio. Her lips curled into a subtle smile. What a great hobby. Once upon a time, those words would have hurt me, but now I just shrugged. It's not a hobby, Marjorie. It's my business, and it's doing very well. Something flashed in her eyes. Irritation? Envy? But it quickly disappeared. Noah works in New York now, she said, as if that should have impressed me. Of course, I moved with him. He's rented us a wonderful apartment in Manhattan. I'm happy for you both, I replied sincerely. And it was true. Let them be happy as far away from me as possible. Marjorie was clearly expecting a different reaction. Disappointed with my calmness, she made one last attempt. You know, you actually did us a favor. That old house. It was never good enough for us. Now we're living the life we always deserved. I'm really glad it worked out for the best for all of us. I smiled sweetly and looked at my watch. I'm sorry, I have to go. It was nice to meet you. And I left without looking back, feeling her gaze on my back. But for the first time in all these years, this look did not burn me, did not make me shrink or doubt myself. It was just the look of a woman who no longer had any importance in my life. After buying a brooch for Mrs. Pringle, I headed to the Olive Garden, where I was supposed to meet Rachel. Upon entering the restaurant, I immediately spotted her at a table by the window, but she wasn't alone. Audrey, Rachel waved at me. We're here. I walked over feeling surprised and curious. Hi, Ethan. That's part of the surprise. Rachel smiled, and I noticed her glance at Ethan. We met by chance at the bookstore last week, and it turned out we had a lot in common. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time, Audrey, Ethan said when we all sat down. But I didn't know if you'd want to see me after everything that's happened. Why not? I asked sincerely. You're the only one of the Gaines family who's treated me like a human being. He smiled wryly. I'm not sure I'm still considered part of the family. Aunt Marjorie made sure everyone knew I was a traitor. We ordered our food, and while we were waiting for it, Ethan told me some news I hadn't expected to hear. I don't know if you know, but Noah actually works in New York. However, it's not as glamorous as Aunt Marjorie probably tells you. It's a small firm. He was hired only because of her friend Beverly's father's connections. And they don't live in Manhattan. They live in Queens, in a small one-bedroom apartment. I don't care, Ethan. I shrugged. My life is not connected to them anymore. I know, he nodded. But there's something you should know. Something that will confirm that your decision was the right one. What is it? I asked, not touching the envelope. Letters. From Noah's ex-fiancée, Vanessa. The one that Marjorie always held up as a role model for you. I remembered how many times I'd heard Marjorie say, Vanessa always cooked delicious dinners for Noah. Vanessa was such a well-mannered girl. I wish you and Vanessa had met. She could have taught you so much. Why are you showing me this? Because it's the truth about why they broke up. The truth is, Vanessa ran away from Noah and Aunt Marjorie, just like you, for the same reasons. I hesitated, but then I took the envelope. I opened it and saw several letters addressed to Ethan. You wrote to him? We were friends in college, he explained, and stayed in touch after she broke up with Noah. She was afraid that he or Aunt Marjorie would stalk her, so she asked me not to disclose her whereabouts. I started reading. With every word, I became creeped out by how much Vanessa's story resembled my own. The same manipulations, the same interference in my personal life, the same gradual erasure of personality. It's like they're sucking my soul out, Ethan, she wrote in one of her letters. I don't know who I am anymore. I'm afraid that if I stay even a day longer, I'll just disappear. I returned the letters to Ethan, feeling a strange, calm validation. Thank you for showing me this, I said. But you know, I don't need proof anymore that my decision was the right one. I feel it every day. We continued our dinner, talking about more pleasant things. I talked about my photography studio. Rachel shared the news about her promotion at work, and Ethan told us that he was moving to our city to start his own landscaping business. By the way, Rachel mentioned as she finished her wine, have you met your new neighbor yet? Not yet, I replied. I've seen him from a distance, but I haven't talked to him. Oh, you should meet Caden. Rachel smiled mysteriously. He teaches literature at the college and is just an incredibly interesting person. Rachel's trying to set you up with him. Ethan laughed. No, I'm not. She elbowed him. I just think they'll get along great. They have a lot in common. I shook my head, smiling. Rachel had always been an incorrigible romantic. Give me time, okay? I'm not ready for a new relationship yet. Who said anything about a relationship? She raised her eyebrows. Just a neighborly friendship. The next day, on my way home from shopping, I ran into a man who was just leaving the Rogers house. He was tall, with thin-rimmed glasses and tousled brown hair. He was trying to lock the door and hold a huge stack of books at the same time. Can I help you? I asked, coming closer. Oh, that would be great. He gratefully handed me some of the books. I'm Caden Foster, by the way. I'm Audrey Mayfield. I nodded at my house. I live across the street. Oh, so you're the legendary Audrey. He smiled, his eyes shining behind his glasses. Mrs. Pringle has told me a lot about you. I'm afraid I can't even imagine what. I smiled in embarrassment. Only good things, I assure you. He took the books from me when we got to his car. Perhaps I could return the favor with a cup of coffee? Or tea? In my old life, I would have refused. I would have been afraid that Noah would be angry, that Marjorie would find a way to ruin everything. But now I was free to make my own decisions. I'd love to, I said, but not today. I have clients in an hour. Sure, he nodded. Maybe tomorrow? I work from home on Tuesday, so I'm free all day. Tomorrow's fine. I waved and walked back to my house, feeling light and a certain excitement I hadn't felt in a very long time. The next few weeks brought an unexpected but pleasant novelty into my life. Caden turned out to be not only an interesting conversationalist, but also a man who understood and respected boundaries. He never showed up unannounced, always asked if it was convenient for me to talk when he called, and never pressured me when I said I was busy. Our friendship developed naturally. Sometimes we would just have coffee on my veranda, discussing books or movies. Sometimes we would walk around the city, and I would show him my favorite places to take pictures. He didn't try to force things, and I appreciated that. One evening, as we sat in my garden stargazing, Caden asked me about the photos hanging in the living room. They're great, he said, especially the one with the city in a puddle. Is that your work? Yes, I nodded. Photography has always been my passion. I'm glad to be back to it. What made you stop? He asked, and then quickly added, if it's not too personal. My ex-husband and his mother. They didn't think it was a serious occupation. He was silent and then said quietly, their loss. These photographs are real art. There was no flattery or attempt to impress in his words, just sincere admiration, and I felt something warm spread through my chest. 3 months after we met, I decided to throw a small dinner party at my house, the first real party since Noah and Marjorie had left. I invited Rachel and her husband, Ethan, Mrs. Pringle, a few neighbors, and of course, Caden. As I was preparing for dinner, I suddenly realized how much my house had changed. It had become brighter, more alive, more open. The walls, once hung with heavy paintings that Marjorie had chosen, were now adorned with my photographs and bright abstract canvases I had found at a local art fair. The furniture had been rearranged to create more space for socializing rather than formal sitting in silence as Marjorie liked. This was now truly my home, and I was going to fill it with laughter and the warmth of true friendship. Dinner was wonderful. We sat at the big table in the dining room, eating, drinking wine, talking and laughing. Mrs. Pringle told stories about my grandmother, making everyone laugh until they cried. Rachel and her husband were discussing vacation plans. Ethan was sharing ideas for his new business, and Caden sat next to me, sometimes touching my arm when he wanted to get my attention, and there was nothing demanding or intrusive about those touches, only tenderness and respect. After dinner, when everyone moved to the living room for dessert and coffee, I was alone in the kitchen for a moment, putting the dishes in the dishwasher. And suddenly, I had a strange feeling, as if I were watching my life from the outside and seeing how beautiful it had become. I remembered how I used to be afraid to go home, knowing that I would be judged and humiliated. How I tiptoed around my own house, trying not to wake Marjorie. How I was afraid to speak my mind at the dinner table. And now, my home was full of laughter and sincerity. The people sitting in my living room were there because they really wanted to be with me. They respected me. They valued me. And I wasn't afraid to be me anymore. You've been here for a few minutes now. I'm more than fine, I replied, smiling. I'm just thinking about how much things have changed. He put the cups down and came closer. For the better, I hope? Definitely for the better. I nodded. You know, this house used to be a prison for me, and now it's home, a real home. That's because it's filled with real feelings now, Caden said, not false ideals or other people's expectations. I looked at him with gratitude, for understanding, for not trying to fix me or change me. Thank you for coming today, I said. Thank you for inviting me, he replied simply. We returned to our guests, and the evening continued. Later, when everyone had left and I was alone, I went out on the veranda with a cup of tea. The night sky was dotted with stars, and the air smelled like the jasmine I had planted last spring. I was thinking about my journey, from a scared, insecure woman who let others control her life to the person I am today. A person who knows her value. A person who sets healthy boundaries. Who is not afraid to be herself. It was not an easy path. There were days when I doubted my decision. When I woke up in the middle of the night, choking on the fear of loneliness. There were moments when other people's judgment seemed unbearable, when gossip and distortion of the truth made me hide from the world. But gradually I learned to listen not to the voices of others, but to my own inner voice, the voice that always knew that I deserved better, that I deserved respect, love, and the freedom to be myself. I knew that there were still many challenges ahead, that healing is a journey, not a destination, that my scars would not disappear completely, but would become part of who I am. But I also knew that I would never again allow anyone to take away my right to happiness, my right to my own space, my right to be Audrey Mayfield, imperfect, still vulnerable, but real. I got my home back, but more importantly, I got myself back.